Mr. McQuire. I want to welcome you today to this presentation on photosynthesis. This presentation follows on from a sequence where we have looked at, first of all, the structure of plants. Then we've talked about the process of pollination. We've looked at water transport in plants, and we're going to talk today about why that's important, and that then feeds into today with photosynthesis. So our learning outcomes for today, first of all, for the challenge to be able to describe the process of photosynthesis, and to do that we're going to use the equation, and we're going to state where a plant gets the resources for it. And then for the aspire, we're going to be able to simply apply that equation to an application which would be intensive crop farming. So before we start, first of all, I try and find somewhere that's quiet to work and free from distractions, and you will need a pen and paper to be able to write and make notes as we go through the work today. So if you need to pause the presentation, please do that now to find the things that you need, or perhaps move. So for our starters today, we're going to use one that I've used several times as we've run through this particular topic on plants. It's really important that we continue to revise what all living things should do to be classed as living, because a lot of the structures are involved in providing these particular processes that we're learning about. We don't get the big picture if we don't keep bringing them back to what living things do. So today our title is photosynthesis. So if you could please just look at the screen for a second. Down at the bottom it says photosynthesis down here in our keywords. If that could go in the top and middle of your page, and if you could then write Mrs. Gren as it's written there. Each of these letters is the first letter of the keyword that's behind this blue square. All will be revealed, but I'm going to help you first of all with N, which is part of the subject for today, because it's written up here and the answer is nutrition. Now, we've talked through these several times, and this is kind of key stage 2 work, moving into key stage 3, but as I've said, we've revised these. So I'm going to give you a minute to see if you can complete as many of these words as possible to which the first letters are written there. So 1 minute, off you go. Okay, so I've given you a help with N, which stands for nutrition, but I wonder how many of the others you've managed to sort out. So let's just spend a few moments on these. M standing for movement, R standing for respiration. We've talked about that in relation to a structure in a cell in the first lesson called a mitochondria. Sensitivity, which seems strange in plants, but they're sensitive to light, for example, and gravity. Growth, which is part again of today's lesson, because obviously we need nutrition for that, and we're going to develop that particular thought as we run through today. Pollination was part of this process with reproduction. Excretion, obviously, if plants gain nutrition, then there will be some output from that particular process of gaining its nutrients, and then nutrition itself. But let's ask a broader question for a second of exactly what is meant by nutrition. Let's add to that. Why do living things need it? And how do plants get nutrition? So we're going to just talk about those for a second before we develop those as we run through. First of all, nutrition is a process by which living organisms provide or obtain food. And that particular process of nutrition usually involves the use of energy, which is provided through respiration. So that process of nutrition doesn't come without structures that are involved in ensuring it takes place. Why do living things need it? Because they require it for respiration, which is up here, but they also require it for other life processes such as growth, for example. How do plants get nutrition? Well, we're going to develop that in a second, but plants have structures, for example, roots and leaves, which are part of this process of gaining nutrition through photosynthesis. So before we go any further, I want to recap and just take you back to this photograph, which I cannot avoid if we're going to learn this topic properly. We have an animal cell on the left and we have a plant cell on the right. This is kind of the single most important thing that we start with when we're talking about life and living processes. Mitochondria are shared in both and is the site of respiration. The nucleus controls what the cell does, has things like DNA inside it, for example. Cytoplasm is found in both and is where chemical reactions occur in the plant. And again, this is just recapping earlier work that we have covered. The cell membrane is involved in controlling what goes in and out of the cell. You may have noticed that humans, animals have a skeleton which supports their cells. Plants don't have a skeleton, so therefore they come with this additional structure, which is a rigid cell wall, which provides structure to support the cell. Chloroplasts, remember this word for the next slide, is the site of photosynthesis, chloroplast. And chloroplasts contain a green substance called chlorophyll. Again, another word. Let's just remember Phil, he's a lovely guy with green skin. Let's see if we can picture that person so we can remember this word. Chloroplasts contain chlorophyll. And the vacuole is full of cell sap, which again is something we talked about in relation to water transport in the last presentation. Okay, so I want to use the following questions now to help us structure our learning for photosynthesis. So could you, under the work that we've done so far, just spend the next 2 minutes putting these questions down? What I'd like you to do, however, is to put a space between each of the questions to allow us to fill them in as we go. I want to make a point before you start on that about some words, however. What are the reactants in the photosynthesis reaction? In a chemical equation, to the left of the arrow, which tells you it's a chemical equation, are the reactants. There could be a plus in here, for example, so we could have a chemical plus another one produces the products, which is down here in this word. Now, if you don't know what the word reactants means and products, I'd like you to include this little help here to enable you to remember those in your beautiful notes as you go. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to get these questions down. Please do them accurately, because the next few slides we're going to be filling these spaces in thick and fast, and there won't be time to be writing the questions at that point. So 2 minutes, off you go. Okay, so, well, you are busy finishing off, or maybe you have finished. I just want to run through the keywords at the bottom of the page for a second. Photosynthesis is the point of the presentation, so we're going to be learning about the equation. Reactants you should just have written down, the left of the arrow. Products, the right of the arrow, and equations, the whole thing together. Chloroplast, the structure in a plant cell where chlorophyll, lovely man with green skin by the way, just to help you remember that. And later in the lesson we're just going to touch base with the word variable as well. So hopefully by now you have finished writing those 5 questions out. If you need some more time, just pause the presentation now. Don't miss any of the 5 questions because the answers come thick and fast from the next slide, just to be clear. Okay, so this slide summarizes an awful lot of the answers to the questions. I've just dragged those through and put them on this slide to help you. So question number 1. Where does photosynthesis take place? Well, that's a broad question. The first thing that I would write down is it takes place in the leaf. But I think we can do better than that now because it takes place in the chloroplast in the leaf, which is one of the key words at the bottom of the page. I'm circling it now. So if you can please put leaf or chloroplast in leaf, then that would be a very detailed, excellent answer. Let's have a look at question number 2. We can use this diagram to help us with this because this effectively is an equation. Going into the reaction, otherwise known as the reactants, are carbon dioxide and water. Water comes from the sky in the form of rain, and carbon dioxide comes from the air. It's a nice molecular diagram of carbon dioxide, or CO2. So they are the reactants, carbon dioxide and water for question number 2. Hopefully you're keeping up. Let's have a look at question number 3. See if you can get ahead of me. What are the products in the photosynthesis reaction? So we're now on the things that come out of the equation. And we've got here the word sugar. Now you may know the word glucose, which is fine, sugar's fine, either of them can be used in describing the product. Then we've got this, which is oxygen as well. As you can see, it's O2, 2 molecules of oxygen being produced, which of course are then used by us in another process called respiration. So we have answered question 1. Photosynthesis takes place in the leaf, in the chloroplast. What are the reactants in the photosynthesis reaction? The answer is carbon dioxide and water. What are the products in the photosynthesis reaction? And the answer is oxygen and sugar. Either way round will do, it makes no difference. Question number 4. What is the green stuff, pigment, that absorbs light, and where can it be found? So we're going to use our keywords down here. The green stuff is a lovely man with green skin, is called chlorophyll. There he is, Mr. Philip. And the chlorophyll is found inside a chloroplast, and both of those structures are inside a leaf. Okay, now question number 5 down at the bottom. Write a word equation for photosynthesis. I just want to give you a little bit more help before we do that on the next slide. So here is our next slide. I want to give you a structure to write the equation out. I'd like you to put down for question 5 just the following structure: a plus with enough space for a word either side, then an arrow, and then another plus with enough space for a word either side. So if you could just draw that out in the space that you have left for question number 5. Our keywords are down here at the bottom, and using the questions that we've already answered, we should be able to complete this. So let's have a go at that and see how we get on. First of all, this side, the left of the arrow, is our reactants, and from the earlier questions that we've answered, the things that go into this equation are carbon dioxide, this one, and water, which goes up through the roots on this one. Now, it doesn't matter which way round you write them, they can be either way round in these spaces here. Carbon dioxide plus water. I'm going to summarize this in a minute, but you could start writing them in as I speak to you. The products, which are on the right hand side of the arrow, are the things that come out of photosynthesis, and you should be thinking glucose or sugar, and the one that's part of respiration is oxygen, a waste product from photosynthesis. So we should have an equation written down, but you can see that there's two boxes left here. So let's just look at those for a second. They're just helpful in reminding us about other things that we have learnt about. First of all, where does photosynthesis take place, or what's the green stuff? And one of these boxes, either of them, is chlorophyll, lovely man with green skin. And the energy to drive this process of ripping molecules apart and rebuilding them over here comes from light energy. So it doesn't matter which way around you write these, they're just conditions or help in remembering what happens. So light energy in either of those, and chlorophyll, lovely man with green skin. Let's look at a summary of that for a second. Okay, so carbon dioxide is reacted with water from the rain, carbon dioxide from the air. Both of those are taken to the chloroplast, and in there's a green chemical, a lovely man with green skin, chlorophyll. Light energy then is used to rip these two apart, and we end up with this high energy molecule called glucose or sugar, and the byproduct as well, which is oxygen. Now we've got some quite advanced science here. The chemical formula of a glucose molecule is that, C6H12O6. Don't need you to know that at the moment. What are the chemical formula of the simple molecules that make up carbon dioxide, water and oxygen? Now, this is an important little skill. If we're going to get this out, then fairly obviously there must be these elements in what must go in. So you may know this already. Do you know the formula of carbon dioxide? If you do. If you don't, then it's CO2. It contains carbon and oxygen. That's hidden in there, isn't it? Oxide and carbon. And water, do you know the chemical formula for water? Because if you don't, there it is, it's H2O. Well worth remembering those. It's good regular knowledge every day for a scientist. Oxygen is O2. So this molecule of glucose can then be produced by various amounts or ratios, different balances of carbon dioxide and water brought together using light energy in the chlorophyll, ripping things apart and rebuilding them as that. What an amazing process that is. Okay, let's talk about your notes for a moment. You've got a title. You've then got Mr. Gren's or Mrs. Gren and the process, and we've then written a lot of questions down, and those questions now have answers between them. And finally, we have reached a point where we begin to talk about the challenge learning outcome for our lesson, to be able to describe the process of photosynthesis using the equation and state where the plant gets the resources for it. So carbon dioxide, can you remember where the plant gets that from? Hopefully you're thinking from the air at the moment. And where does a plant get water from? Hopefully at this point you're thinking it's rain that comes up through the roots. We're now going to have to remember and try and recall this equation, but we're going to use that equation now and have a little bit of help in remembering that by moving through the implications, first of all, for our planet. Why does it matter so much? But eventually we're going to do this bit of application at the top of the page about something called intensive crop farming, where farmers try and make this process go as quickly as possible to grow as much food for people as possible. Okay, this is big stuff, so let's look at it carefully. Scientists are working hard to make sure that crop plants carry out as much photosynthesis as possible. They're trying to increase the amount of chlorophyll in some plants and make photosynthesis as efficient as possible in others. So I'd like you to do some thinking for a second. Why would it matter on this planet that we made photosynthesis go as quickly as possible? I'd like you to think in terms of us as humans, but I'd also like you to think in terms of the planet itself. Now, this is really big science stuff that we're talking about now, and we need to just increase your general knowledge and the way that you think about this equation. So let me just guide you through these questions, this big important Earth questions, for a moment. A great amount of photosynthesis would, well, first of all, we've got billions of people that we need to feed on this planet, so therefore it would allow us to increase food production, which would allow humanity to continue to expand without starvation. So obviously a huge issue is feeding the vast number of people that are on our planet, and they are fed first and foremost by this process of photosynthesis in plants. Even the animals that we eat, they feed from plants in the first instance, so they need photosynthesis to allow them to have food. Here's a critical one, and we're beginning to really get worried about this particular aspect of our world and what we've done to it. We need the process of photosynthesis to help us to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, because photosynthesis allows us to trap that carbon dioxide in sugars, as we have seen. If we can remove that carbon dioxide, then that will help reduce something called global warming that you may have heard of. So these are critically important reasons why photosynthesis matters and why we should understand this particular process, not just for our food, but also as an environmental issue that we need to source with global warming. So looking now and changing directions, I wanted to just talk to you about how we would measure the rate of photosynthesis. Now, I wonder if you can remember what gas is produced by photosynthesis. If you look back in your notes at the equation that you've written down, it will be in the products. That's the right-hand side of your equation, and you are looking for the one that is a gas that's produced. Now, it's not glucose because that's a solid unless it's dissolved, so it could be in a liquid form, but we are looking here at oxygen. So here we have a water plant, and water plants are really useful because we can actually see the byproducts of photosynthesis in the production of bubbles of oxygen. And we're talking here about an experiment that's part of Key Stage 4 GCSE work, but something that we can touch on now. So it's very hard to measure the rate of photosynthesis in normal plants because you can't see the products very easily. So the easiest way to do it is to investigate it in pondweed, in water, because you can see the bubbles of oxygen being made. Let's take that a bit further. So what we could do, for example, is to put a piece of pondweed that's called Eladia, that doesn't matter, and that is sitting there under a filter funnel that you may well be used to using the other way up. And what it does is it collects the oxygen bubbles that are being produced, and we can then collect that in a boiling tube, and we can actually count the amount of oxygen that's produced. Now, on our photosynthesis equation, we've already said that light is required for photosynthesis. So the last key word down at the bottom here is variable, and it gives me an opportunity to have a very quick and short discussion with you about the three types of variable that we can have. Let's just say for a start that we can move this lamp closer and further away from the pondweed. The more light that we put onto the plant hopefully should increase the amount of photosynthesis. So the closer the plant to the light, or the closer the light to the plant, the faster the rate of photosynthesis. Now, that's something we can change, and there is a word here that means it's allowed to change. And the word that I want to just make it clear to you means that I'm allowed to do whatever I want. It's this word independent. So first of all, the thing that's allowed to change in this is the lamp, which increases or decreases the amount of light. The dependent variable is what we measure, because the amount of light changes the amount of oxygen that is being produced. So the dependent variable is measured. We could do that, for example, using a measuring cylinder with a scale on the side, or we could even use something like a syringe and suck that oxygen and measure how much oxygen there is in there. A control variable is things that we literally stay the same, they are controlled. And things that matter, for example, would be the type of pondweed that we used. The temperature of the equipment as well would be critical in here. The length of time that we left it for. These are all things that we can change. Now, I don't want to go into this in any more detail at the moment because this is solid GCSE work. But I think it's important that we discuss variables with you at the moment. So let's just ask you a quick question. Which one of those three meant that you could change? Hopefully you've thought independent. Which one of those is something that you don't allow to change? And that would be a control variable, which is the one that we measure. And that's the last one, if you're following me, and that's the dependent, because it is dependent on the amount of light in this case, which is the independent variable. So we change that and measure that. Okay, thanks for listening to that. And as we go through and develop you as a scientist, they will become more and more important, because experiments don't work unless we control and understand variables properly. Okay, so we're now moving to our Aspire part of the lesson. We need to be able to feed lots and lots of people, and in this country of ours, where it can be dark for lots and lots of the year, it's really important that we understand that people can force plants to grow without bringing them in from abroad all the time where it's hot and sunny. And we can do that by constructing greenhouses and putting banks of lights inside them and keeping things warm in there. Now, I may just have given you quite a lot of answers in what I've just said, so I'm hoping you were listening to that. The reason I say that is because this equation has hiding in it things that we can change that are called factors that can make photosynthesis go quicker. It's effectively quite a lot of it is all in front of you, and students quite often forget what things, for example, like a gardener with a greenhouse will actually be doing to make plants grow quicker. So if you have a look at the equation, I'm going to give you 30 seconds just to think about some of the things that we could change that would make that equation go quicker, producing more glucose. Let me structure that for you. This equation tells us how we could make photosynthesis happen faster. What things could we provide for a plant to make this happen? So I put the word more 3 times down there. Looking at the equation, what can I provide that will make that equation produce more glucose? Just spend 30 seconds now, see if you can think of 3 things that you could change. Okay, this is really important stuff because obviously companies like Sainsbury's and Morrison's, etc., and some which own their own farms, Morrison's definitely does that, they spend an awful lot of money making sure that crops grow as quickly as possible. So let's have a look. So we could provide more carbon dioxide. That's obvious. If we put more in here, then we should get more out of here. We can provide more water. If we put more in here, we'll get more out of here. We can provide both of those, of course, and make sure that we do that properly and accurately. Now, this is important. We could provide more light energy. And this, of course, is the reason why plants grow quicker in the summer than in the winter. There are other factors we can change that are part of Key Stage 4. I'm going to mention them quickly just in case they stick, but we could increase the temperature. And on a warm summer's day, plants grow quicker. It's why we grow plants in greenhouses as well. So let's just spend a moment on a quick plenary. Let's see how you get on. What process do plants use to provide nutrition for themselves? Question number 1. Hopefully you've got that right. It's the title at the top of your page. I'll give it to you them all together in a moment. Number 2, what are the products of photosynthesis? First of all, I expect you now to know the word products. Where is that in an equation? So what 2 products are there? And what is the chemical called where photosynthesis takes place? All I will say to you is green-skinned man. Hopefully that's brought that back. So here we go. First of all, the process we've learnt about today is called photosynthesis. The products of photosynthesis are glucose and oxygen, and the name of the green-skinned man is chlorophyll. So thank you for staying with this presentation today. In today's presentation, we have looked at the topic of photosynthesis. And for the challenge, we should now be able to describe the process of photosynthesis and do that using an equation with reactants on the left and products on the right. We should know where water and carbon dioxide come from. For the Aspire, we should then be able to look at that equation and say what a farmer could provide for that equation to make the plants that the farmer is growing grow even faster. So thank you for staying with this presentation today, and goodbye.